President Trump called the Iran nuclear deal the worst deal ever negotiated. And a new report has put that deal into question once again. The report says a high-profile prisoner swap with Iran was a much bigger gift to Iran than the Obama administration ever let on. It involved the Justice Department dropping charges and international warrants against 14 fugitives who posed national security threats to the U.S. And that's according to Politico and the Wall Street Journal. Now, for more, I'd like to welcome Adelle Nazarian. She's a writer for Breitbart News. Adelle, thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Adelle, when the Obama administration announced in January of 2016 that it was dropping charges against 7 Iranian prisoners as part of the swap, well, the president and other officials described them as civilians and businessmen. Was this a valid description?
No, it was actually grossly mischaracterized. These men had known connections with the Iranian regime, and they were, as a report in Politico recently revealed, and I reported on for Breitbart News, they were considered national security threats. One of the 7 men who were described as businessmen actually had sold weapons and materials that were sent through China to Iran and have been used for illicit activity. Another of the men who was named among the 7 actually was involved in smuggling IEDs that were used by Shiite militias in Iraq that ended up killing hundreds of Americans. So, unfortunately, President Barack Obama lied in order to secure his legacy, and it ended up resulting in a lot of casualties.
Right. Well, Adelle, in addition to that prisoner release, the Justice Department also rather quietly dropped some charges and international arrest warrants against 14 other men. What do we know about these men?
These men also were involved in highly sophisticated networks of information, negotiations, back-channel negotiations between the Iranian mullahs and, I guess, certain members of the Obama administration. And I really have to say, I don't believe that this was a case of naivety. I believe that the higher-ups in the Obama administration that were involved with this negotiation process really knew the range and the context in which these 21, if you include the other 7 men, were operating, and how they were really in contrast to U.S. national security interests. And unfortunately, it was just an attempt to secure a legacy. And I think that if this were to happen in any other country, if this same exact situation were to happen in Iran, where people are even considered to be a threat or to their national security or a spy, they would be immediately placed in a jail cell. We currently have 2 U.S. citizens, dual U.S. Iranian citizens, who are sitting in a jail cell. And I believe President Trump is currently trying to negotiate, not negotiate so much the way that President Barack Obama did, which was considered ransom, unfortunately, with the exchange of pallets of money for 4 dual U.S. Iranian citizens and a 5th American. But right. To talk about ways to extradite these 2 U.S. Iranian citizens back to America.
Well, Adelle, you say that this was not a question of the president being naive, in your opinion, that he knew that these prisoners and that these men were potential national security threats. Why would the Obama administration do this? Why would the Obama administration intentionally put the U.S. in a compromised position?
So, I do not believe that former President Barack Obama necessarily wanted for American lives to be lost, that he wanted to hurt intentionally, U.S. national security and to weaken us strategically in parts of the Middle East where we have a presence. I think that it was more of an intentional naivety based in the fact that he was more interested in securing a long-term legacy and a name for himself after he left the White House. And unfortunately, there are pro-Iran lobbies, regime apologists who are in Washington, D.C. currently, and they had the ear of the president, and they were able to push their own agenda, which coincided with the agenda of the mullahs in Iran, and that's what happened. So I don't think he necessarily intentionally wanted to see American lives lost. Unfortunately, the consequences of his actions were that American lives were lost. And hopefully under this new administration, there can be some backpedaling in terms of what he's done and preventing any future occurrences that cause our own nationals to be at risk.
Well, Adelle, you mentioned backpedaling. What can be done at this stage? The president says that indications are that Iran is complying with the deal. Whether the UN inspections that verify and Iran's own inspections that verify this compliance are accurate are another story. But what can President Trump do now?
It's very interesting that you mentioned that. In fact, the National Council of Resistance in Iran, the NCRI, which has some ties to the Mujahideen Khalq, the MEK in Iran, which was at one point listed as a terrorist group under President Bill Clinton in order to gain favor with the Iranian regime. They've since been unlisted. So basically, they have found that Iran is unfortunately weaponizing nukes in Iran at the off-limits Parchin site that the IAEA does not have access to. So even that deal is not being adhered to. When Rex Tillerson said, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson said that the deal is actually being complied with, he meant a different aspect of it, the aspect that has been listed on paper. Unfortunately, the other part of it, the weaponization part, was not part of the deal as part of the JCPOA. So that's where they're cheating.
Adelle, thank you so much for your analysis. Adelle Nazarian.